Hatchet, Chapter 1. Brian Robeson stared out the window of the small plane at the endless, green, northern wilderness below. It was a small plane, a Cessna 406, a bush plane, and the engine was so loud, so roaring and consuming and loud, that it ruined any chance for conversation. Not that he had much to say. He was 13 and the only passenger on the plane with a pilot named, what was it? Jim or Jake or something? Who was in his mid-40s, who had been silent as he worked to prepare for takeoff. In feet, since Brian had come to the small airport in Hampton, New York, to meet the plane, driven by his mother, the pilot had spoken only 5 words to him. Get in the co-pilot's seat, which Brian had done. They had taken off, and that was the last of the conversation. There had been the initial excitement, of course. He had never flown in a single-engine plane before, and to be sitting in the co-pilot's seat with all the controls right there in front of him, all the instruments in his face as the plane clawed for altitude, jerking and sliding on the wind currents as the pilot took off, had been interesting and exciting, but in 5 minutes they had leveled off at 6,000 feet and headed northwest, and from then on the pilot had been silent, staring out the front, and the drone of the engine had been all that was left. The drone and the sea of green trees that lay before the plane's nose and flowed to the horizon, spread with lakes, swamps, and wandering streams and rivers. Now Brian sat looking out the window with the roaring thundering through his ears, and tried to catalogue what had led up to his taking this flight. The thinking started, always it started with a single word: divorce. So far in the story, we have the main character as Brian. And how old is he? 13. And all we know is that he is on a plane and that he hasn't talked very much to the pilot of the plane, and he is the co-pilot, and that he's in this plane because of a divorce. So let's continue to read. It was an ugly word, he thought, a tearing, ugly word that meant fights and yelling. Lawyers, God, he thought. How he hated lawyers, who sat with their comfortable smiles and tried to explain to him in legal terms how all that he lived in was coming apart, and the breaking and shattering of all the solid things. His home, his life, all the solid things. Divorce. A breaking word, an ugly breaking word. Divorce. Secrets. No, not secrets so much as just the secret. What he knew and had not told anybody was he knew about his mother that had caused the divorce. What he knew, the secret. Divorce, the secret. Brian felt his eyes beginning to burn and knew there would be tears. He had cried for a time, but that was gone now. He didn't cry now. Instead, his eyes burned and tears came, the seeping tears. So we know that the conflict in this story so far is Brian is going through something very painful. His parents are going through a divorce, and he knows some sort of secret about his mother that led up to the divorce. Conflict is another word for problem. Instead, his eyes burned and tears came, the seeping tears that burned, but he didn't cry. He wiped his eyes with a finger and looked at the pilot out of the corner of his eye to make sure he hadn't noticed the burning and tears. The pilot sat large, his hands lightly on the wheel, feet on the rudder pedals. He seemed more a machine than a man, an extension of the plane. On the dashboard in front of him, Brian saw dials, switches, meters, knobs, levers, cranks, lights, handles that were wiggling and flickering, all indicating nothing that he understood, and the pilot seemed the same way, part of the plane not human. When he saw Brian look up at him, the pilot seemed to open up a little bit, and he smiled. Ever fly in the co-pilot's seat before? He leaned over and lifted the headset off his right ear and put it on his temple, yelling to overcome the sound of the engine. Brian shook his head. He had never been in any kind of plane, never seen the cockpit of a plane, except in films or on television. It was loud and confusing. First time. It's not as complicated as it looks. Good plane like this almost flies itself. The pilot shrugged. Makes my job easy. He took Brian's left arm. Here, put your hands on the controls and your feet on the rudder pedals, and I'll show you what I mean. Brian shook his head. I'd better not. Sure, try it. Brian reached out and took the wheel in a grip so tight that his knuckles were white. He pushed his feet down on the pedals. The plane slewed suddenly to the right. Not so hard. Take her light. Take her light. Brian eased off, relaxed his grip. The burning in his eyes was forgotten momentarily as the vibration of the plane came through the wheel and the pedals. It seemed almost alive. So it's a he's he's temporarily flying this plane, and he's kind of forgetting about all his pain that he has inside him right now. See, the pilot let go of his wheel, raised his hands in the air, and took his feet off the pedals to show Brian he was actually flying the plane alone. Simple! Now turn the wheel a little to the right and push on the right rudder pedal a small amount. Brian turned the wheel slightly, and the plane immediately banked to the right, and when he pressed on the right rudder pedal, the nose slid across the horizon to the right. He left off on the pressure and straightened the wheel, and the plane righted itself. Now you can turn. Bring her back to the left a little. Brian turned the wheel left, pushed on the left pedal, and the plane came back around. It's easy, he smiled. At least this part. The pilot nodded. All of the flying is easy. Just takes learning, like everything else. Like everything else, he took the controls back, then reached up and rubbed his left shoulder. Aches and pains must be getting old. Brian let go of the controls and moved his feet away from the pedals as the pilot put his hands on the wheel. Thank you. But the pedal had but the pilot had put his headset back on the and the gratitude was lost in the engine's noise, and things went back to Brian looking out the window at the ocean of the trees and lakes. The burning eyes did not come back, but memories did come flooding in. The words, always the words, divorce, the secret, fight, split. The big split Brian's father did not understand as Brian did. He knew only that Brian's mother wanted to break the marriage apart. The split had come and then the divorce all so fast, and the court had left him with his mother except for the summers and what the judge called visitation rights. So formal. Brian hated judges as he hated lawyers. Judges that leaned over the bench and asked Brian if he understood where he was to live and why. Judges who did not know what had really happened. Judges with caring look that meant nothing as lawyers said legal phrases that meant nothing. In the summer, Brian would live with his father. In the school year, with his mother. That's what the judge said after looking at the papers on his desk and listening to the lawyers talk, words. Now the plane lurched slightly to the right, and Brian looked at the pilot. He was rubbing his shoulder again, and there was the sudden smell of body gas in the plane. Brian turned back to avoid embarrassing the pilot, who was obviously in some discomfort. Must have stomach troubles. So this summer, the first summer when he was allowed to have visitation rights with his father, with the divorce only 1 month old, Brian was heading north. His father was a mechanical engineer who had designed or invented a new drill bit for oil drilling, a self-cleaning, self-sharpening bit. He was working in the oil fields of Canada, up on the tree line where the tundra started and the forest ended. Brian was riding up from New York with some drilling equipment. It was lashed down in the rear of the plane next to a fabric bag the pilot had called a survival pack, which had emergency supplies in case they had to make an emergency landing. That had to be specially made in the city, riding in a bush plane with the pilot named Jim or Jake or something, who had turned out to be an all right guy, letting him fly and all. So the pilot is in some kind of discomfort. He has some kind of he's rubbing there's a sudden smell of gas. He has stomach trouble. Um so that's some more information, and we know that they're heading up to the oil fields of Canada because that's where his dad's working. So he's going to spend the summer with his dad. So that's where they're heading from New York. They started from New York. Um, okay, continuing. Except for the smell. Now there was a constant odor, and Brian took another look at the pilot, found him rubbing the shoulder and down the arm now, the left arm, letting go more gas and wincing. Probably something he ate, Brian thought. His mother had driven him from the city to meet the plane at Hampton, where it came to pick up the drilling equipment. A drive in silence, a long drive in silence. 2.5 hours of sitting in the car, staring out the window, just as he was now starting out the window of the plane. Once after an hour, when they were out of the city, she turned to him. Look, can't we talk this over? Can't we talk this out? Can't you tell me what's bothering you? So now Brian is having a flashback of his mother and him driving to um, just driving before he had left to get on this plane. And there was the words again, divorce, split, the secret. How could he tell her what he knew? So basically, Brian's mother does not know that he knows the reason why they had to get a divorce. That he knows the secret. So, and there was the words again, divorce, split, the secret. How could he tell her what he knew? So he had remained silent, shook his head, and continued to stare unseeing at the countryside, and his mother had gone back to driving, only to speak to him one more time when they were close to Hampton. She reached over the back of the seat and brought up a paper sack. I got something for you for the trip. Brian took the sack and opened the top. Inside there was a hatchet, the kind with a steel handle and a rubber hand grip. The head was in a stout leather case that had a brass riveted belt loop. It goes on your belt, his mother spoke now without looking at him. There were some farm trucks on the road now, and she had to weave through them and watch traffic. The man at the store said you could use it, in the woods with your father. Dad, he thought, not my father. My dad, thanks, it's really nice. But the words sounded hollow, even to Brian. So she bought him a hatchet, which looks like a small little axe, that he can attach to his belt loop as a going away present that she thought that he could use out in the wilderness, basically. The man, okay, Dad, let's see. It goes on your belt, his mother spoke now without looking at him. There were some farm trucks on the road now, and she had to weave through them and watch traffic. The man at the store said you could use it, in the woods with your father. Dad, he thought. Not my father, my dad. Thanks, it's really nice. But the words sounded hollow, even to Brian. Try it on. See how it looks on your belt. And he would normally have said no, that it looked too hokey to have a hatchet on your belt. Those were normal things he would say, but her voice was thin and had a sound like something thin that would break if you touched it, and he felt bad for not speaking to her. Knowing what he knew, even with the anger, the hot white hate of his anger at her, he still felt bad for not speaking to her, and so, to humor her, he loosened his belt and pulled the right side out and put the hatchet on the rethreaded the belt. Scooch around so I can see. He moved around in the seat and feeling only slightly ridiculous. She nodded, just like a scout, my little scout. And there was the tremendous tenderness in her voice that she had when he was small, the tenderness that she had when he was small and sick with the cold. And she put her hand on his forehead, and the burning came into his eyes again, and he had turned away from her and looked out the window, forgotten the hatchet on his belt, and so arrived at the plane with the hatchet still on his belt. Because it was a bush flight from a small airport, there had been no security, and the plane had been waiting with the engine running when he arrived, and he had grabbed his suitcase and pack bag and run from for the plane without stopping to remove the hatchet. Oh, sorry. So it was still on his belt. At first, he had been embarrassed, but the pilot had said nothing about it, and Brian forgot it as they took off and began flying. More smell now. So the flashback's over. We're back to present time. And remember, the pilot had um, bad gas, and was having stomach problems. More smell now. Bad. Brian turned again to glance at the pilot, who had both hands on the stomach and was grimacing in pain, reaching for his left shoulder as Brian watched. Don't know, kid. The pilot's words were a hiss, barely audible. Bad aches here. Bad aches. Thought it was something I ate, but he stopped as a fresh spasm of pain hit him. Even Brian could see how bad it was. The pain drove the pilot back into the seat, back, back and down. I've never had anything like this. The pilot reached for the switch on his mic cord, his hand coming up in a small arc from his stomach, and he flipped the switch and said, "This is Flight 46." And now a jolt took him like a hammer blow, so forcefully that he seemed to crush back into the seat, and Brian reached for him, could not understand at first what it was, could not kn- could not know, and then knew. Brian knew. The pilot's mouth went rigid. He swore and jerked a short series of slams into the seat, holding his shoulder now. Swore in his chest. Oh God, my chest is coming apart. Brian knew now. The pilot was having a heart attack. Brian had been in the shopping mall with his mother when a man in front of Paisley's store had suffered a heart attack. He had gone down and screamed about his chest. Much older than a, an old man much older than the pilot. Brian knew the pilot was having a heart attack, and even as the knowledge came to Brian, he saw the pilot slam into the seat one more time. One more awful time. He slammed back into the seat, and his right leg jerked, pulling the plane to the side in a sudden twist, and his head fell forward, and came. Spit came from the corners of his mouth, and his legs contracted up into the seat, and his eyes rolled back in his head, and there was only white for his eyes, and the smell became worse, filled the cockpit, and all of it so fast, so incredibly fast, that Brian's mind could not take it at first, could only see it in stages. The pilot had been talking just a moment ago, complaining of the pain. He had been talking, then the jolts had come. The jolts that took the pilot back had come, and now Brian sat, and there was a strange feeling of silence in the thrumming roar of the engine, a strange feeling of silence and being alone. Brian was stopped. He was stopped. Inside, he was stopped. He could not think past what he saw, what he felt. All was stopped. The very core of him, the very center of Brian Robeson, was stopped and stricken with a white flash of horror, a terror so intense that his breathing, his thinking, and nearly his heart had stopped. Stopped. Seconds passed, seconds that became all of his life, and he began to know what he was seeing, and began to understand what he saw, and that was worse, so much worse, that he wanted to make his mind freeze again. He was sitting in a bush plane roaring 7,000 feet above northern wilderness with a pilot who had suffered a massive heart attack and who was either dead or in something close to a coma. He was alone, in the roaring plane, with no pilot. He was alone. Alone. And that is the end of chapter 1. So when you finish chapter 1, and you can quickly see that the suspense is kind of rising because the conflict is there's two conflicts so far that were introduced. One is with his mom. He's very upset with his mom. He knows a secret about her and what led to the divorce. We don't know what that secret is yet. And then the other conflict is the fact that he's on this plane and the pilot it's is having a heart attack on the plane and he's alone. At the end of chapter 1 it tells us he's alone, so we can infer what's not stated in the text yet, but we can infer or predict that the pilot might be dead and he is left to fly this plane on his own. So the suspense is rising. So let's go over to the questions that we are to answer today. Quick write. I want to see if I can actually. We can just do it from here. That's fine. So the quick write, it says, have you ever flown in a plane before? Write about your experience. Did you find it scary or exciting? So You can say, yes, I have flown in a plane. When we write a paragraph, it's important. I want you to practice writing a paragraph. So, have you ever flown in a plane before? Or you don't have to necessarily write a paragraph, just write complete sentences and make sure you restate the question. So, the question was, have you ever flown in a plane before? I have flown in a plane before. It and it says, write about your experience. Did you find it scary or exciting? So I should have said, I have flown in many different planes before. Plane rides, I guess I should say plane rides before. I have flown in many different plane rides before. Most were exciting. One trip was scary because of all of the turbulence. I was scared and had to pray to calm myself down. Sorry, these emails keep coming. Junk mail keeps coming up. All right, so I've flown in many different plane rides before. Most were exciting. One trip was scary because of all of the turbulence. I was scared and had to pray to calm myself down. Um, you could talk more than make sure I put a period there. You could write more than that. But you are going to talk about your own experience and make sure it's incomplete sentences. And this is for chapters 1 and 2. Choose the best answers. Where is Brian's plane headed? How does the plane how does the pilot die? Um, true or false. You can put T or F on the line. Um, Brian's mother gives him a backpack as a gift. Brian's parents recently got a divorce. Brian tries to radio for help. The pilot lets Brian fly the plane for a minute. Brian knows a secret about his mother. What do you know about Brian and his family so far? Can you relate to anything about his life? And then you need to write complete sentences there and tell me if there's anything that you find similar about your own life that you can understand where Brian is, like how Brian feels about things or anything like that. Any kind of connection you can make to Brian and his family. Okay. So you're gonna answer these questions after you read chapter 2 as well. And I'll check one thing here. I can find it. Okay, so make sure you don't answer this, also this comprehension and analysis, until after you read chapters 1 and 2. The vocabulary: wincing, turbulence, and rebelled. So you have to write the definition here. And if you don't know what the definition is, you come down here. So wincing is a verb, cringing due to pain or distress. So when I go back up here, I'm going to type in, let's see, cringing due to pain or distress. It's a verb. Means it's an action that someone does. Oops. Cringing due to pain. I'm just going to put underneath here, verb. And then you don't have to really, well, you could look up here, upload from computer. Ooh, no, I don't want to do that. You could look for, search the web. I don't know, wincing. There we go. I'll add this, and you just, when you click on it, there's a little insert button, and you can add it right here. And I'm making it small enough so that it will fit where it needs to go. Might just be a little hard to see. Turbulence. And then you'll go back down and look for turbulence. Turbulence is bumpiness. It's a noun. It's a thing. So it's a noun. Bumpiness. And then I can go to this little icon up here. It says insert image. With the magnifying glass, I can look for turbulence. Going down to see what my options are. I don't know, I'll just use this one. Rebelled. It's a verb or an action, and it's resisted, fought against. And you can go up to the little, it looks like a mountain kind of, or triangles in a picture frame or something like that. And you click on the little magnifying glass and you type in rebelled. That one might be harder to find a picture of. Sure, we'll make since it means fought against, I'll just make a little picture of like some type of war. Doesn't have to be perfect, but the rebelled is a verb. Okay, so you're going to complete this page and this page. Okay? And you're going to wait to complete this page until after you have read chapters 1 and 2. Um, and I will go over these answers. Make sure you're handing your work in. I'm giving you till Wednesday to hand this work in for chapters 1 and 2. Looking to see if there's anything else. So there's more definitions here that you would type just by going to look down here. And most of the time, like for this, it says synonyms and antonyms. Synonyms are words that are similar. Antonyms are words that are different. Parts of speech, it would be like if it's a noun, verb, or an adverb. So this is only talking about the word cross. So if I look at cross, it's an adjective and it means annoyed. So I'm going to go back up here and I am going to, the synonym would be annoyed, another word for cross. And the antonym or the opposite of cross, the opposite of annoyed would be, I don't know, it could be happy, friendly, I don't know. I don't know. Happy, satisfied. Um, Part of speech, we said it was an adjective. An adjective is a word that describes a noun. So if I said, um, the annoyed girl, um, the annoyed girl left the party early. Um, that's an example of a sentence. Annoyed would describe girl, because girl's a noun. Adjectives are words that describe nouns. Um, Illustration, you could look up again, look up the word cross. I mean, those are all what's going to come up. So, okay. Well, it's not getting what I want. Hmm. I'm guessing you're gonna get different pictures. I have no idea. Mean kids. How about mean faces? There we go. There, I like this Lego one. We'll use the Lego one. And you can just put that up there. Write a sentence containing the word smoldered below. Then illustrate your sentence. So again, you can look up, well, that's a scary looking face. Smoldered. Uh, Write a sentence containing the word smolder below, then illustrate your sentence. No, you could just write a sentence here about smoldered then. Okay, so you're going to complete this page, this page, this page. When it says this here says draw a picture of the most memorable part of these chapters in the banner, write a fitting caption. So after you read chapters 1 through 3, you will um you will you can just look up an image and then I'll put a text box in here. But oh, there it is actually. So, and these are just, if this would be like a vocabulary quiz for chapters 1 through 3. So, choose the best synonym. Remember, it's the same meaning. For frantic, choose the best antonym. That means the opposite meaning. For ruefully below. Choose the word that best completes the following sentence. I was so blank to get an A on my test that I stayed up late studying. Below, write about what would happen if you rebelled against your parents or teacher. So it's pretty much answering questions about vocabulary for these 2 pages. Actually, these 3 pages, that's vocabulary. And that's a lot of points that's going to be worth. And that's pretty much it. I'm not going to have you do these pages down here for now. But you can use these flashcards to help you answer the vocabulary questions. Good luck.